What's up guys, hello to Footballtalk here. 272 regular season games have been played and the NFL playoff bracket is set. Just like last year, I want to walk you guys through each individual matchup, predicting every round with Super Bowl 59 at the end of it. Once we get to that final battle, I'll have an in-depth preview in written form over on my site hellotofootballtalk.com. But for this video, I'll just say a few words about the makeup of each team and then try to give a couple of keys that led me to my decisions on who will advance. Let's get straight into it as we fill the left side here first, with the wildcard round in the AFC and the Denver Broncos at the Buffalo Bills. For Buffalo, of course, they have the favorite for MVP in Josh Allen, playing his best season in terms of big play creation in relation to avoiding negatives, but they've done a much better job of playing a balanced brand of offensive football, finishing behind oldie Baltimore in DVOA and EP per play. At the same time, the defense has certainly shown that they can be vulnerable against top-flight attacks, but they have an aggressive front of guys that can get home and a well-organized backend under Sean McDermott. Meanwhile, the Broncos were one of the big surprises of the season, with a rookie quarterback in Bo Nix showcasing incredible growth individually, as head coach Sean Payton also kind of reinvented what this offense looks like. And of course the defense has been unbelievable under Vance Joseph, finishing number 1 in EP per play, sacks, and top 3 in a variety of other categories. They also have a great kicker and return specialist to gain and take advantage of field position advantages. So as I think about paths for either team to win here, it feels a lot easier to make a case for Bills group that has only lost one meaningful game since week 5, and that was by 2 points on the road to the Rams. If Denver runs the ball effectively early on with gap concepts against his penetrating front, and they set up shots of play action that isolate Buffalo's safeties, that's why I think they can give those guys trouble. With that being said, where the Broncos do has really eaten has been getting sacks and creating turnovers, and Josh simply doesn't give you those. He has only been sacked 14 times total, and his 8% pressure to sack conversion rate is the lowest in the entire league, while his big time throw percentage is nearly triple his turnover worthy play rates. Amari Cooper may be blanketed by Pat Surtain, but they've been so good at featuring ancillary weapons if that's what the defense dictates to them. And for as great as the Broncos have been defensively, looking at 3 of the 4 legit franchise quarterbacks they faced over the second half of the season, that's Lamar, Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow. Taking out Patrick Mahomes for now because their offense was as subpar at that stage as it has been all season. Those guys absolutely shredded them. That pair of the Bills been willing to call up some spot drop coverages defensively themselves, and coming up with a ball where Peyton draws up Nix just throwing the ball into a window without really scanning the field, that should be enough for Buffalo here. I've got them taking care of business at home. Which gets us to a second matchup here, the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Baltimore Ravens. Of course this will be the third meeting between these two AFC North rivals, which they split the regular season series, with Baltimore coming a 2-point conversion short of tying up maybe the worst game played of the season in terms of hurting themselves and allowing the Steelers to take advantage of opportunities to swing things in their favor. While in the second one, Lamar Jackson threw an interception in the red zone when at that point they were only up by a touchdown to start the fourth quarter, before Marlon Humphrey pick 6 decided the outcome a couple of snaps later. Lamar obviously is right there with Josh Allen for his third league MVP already, and he's been significantly better in certain areas than in either one of those campaigns, in particular when it comes to identifying pressure and defeating the blitz, where he went from below average to literally number 1 in the league if you look at the efficiency metrics. That's paired with Derrick Henry having another record-breaking season as a downhill force, and offensive line has continued to progress, and a group of pass catchers that has really stepped up. On the flip side, the defense has gone from 26th in EP per play through the first 8 weeks to 2nd from that point onwards, with a couple of personnel decisions at safety, and the unit overall merging together under new defensive coordinator Zach Orr. The one big concern is that they finished behind only the lowly Jets with 132 penalties for over 1,100 yards. For the Steelers on the opposite side, it's been a very different story. They entered the postseason on a 4-game losing streak following the 10-3 start. Russell Wilson has reverted to his Broncos self, where he feels erratic inside the pocket and resorts to a bunch of vertical shots down the sideline. George Pickens has highlighted more for stuff that has nothing to do with playing the receiver position, and you still have the inefficiency of Najee Harris as the featured back. The defense is at least a fringe top 10 unit, but a majority of metrics, even if they've been vulnerable in the back end recently, they just have a knack for getting a strip sack or forcing a bad throw in a big moment that makes them feel different. And the special teams coordinator Danny Smith has received more screen time than anybody for leading the number 1 unit in DVOA, good for a punt fake at any moment, doing a great job of covering kicks, and having missed automatic Chris Boswell banging in 50-yarders constantly. So as I project what we could see in this matchup, I simply have a tough time seeing Pittsburgh pulling this one out. They understand how to limit some of the superhuman stuff Lamar can do, how they compress the pocket, and then they're a heavy cover 1 team against the receiving corps that doesn't scare you to death necessarily. And Baltimore might be without Zay Flowers on Saturday. However, Rashad Bateman is actually very good against pressman coverage, and looking at some of the pinpoint throws Lamar had in that second matchup, the Steelers will need to mix up their looks against the quarterback to force him to adjust again. I'm picking the Ravens to pull away in the fourth quarter here, and the only way I can see the matchup going the opposite way is if TJ Watt tomahawks the ball off Lamar's hand, they block either a punt or field goal, and Russ connects a few times down the field of Pickens against Brandon Stevens, who has had issues locating and playing the deep ball on several occasions this season. That brings us to probably the least inspiring matchup of this first round, which is kind of wild to say considering what you probably would have thought when you heard Justin Herbert against CJ Stroud in the playoffs prior to the actual season. Now, the Chargers have definitively exceeded expectations, finishing with the best record since 2018, just 1 year into the Jim Harbaugh experience. They've been so much more buttoned up overall as an operation. Herbert has been slinging it around with great confidence. Ladd McConkey has looked about as good as any rookie receiver, despite the names at the top of the class. And J.K. Dobbins being back from injury at least give that run game a little more juice. Where I'm concerned is the interior part of the pass protection, and what we get from Greg Roman as offensive coordinator, trying to match wits with some of the best minds in the sport. Thankfully, that LA defense has taken a massive step forward and to just cement the coordinator with how fundamentally sound they are in terms of run fits and coverage rules, with room upwards in terms of complexity of pressure looks, which I've called for in order to help on a still vulnerable group of corners if they get isolated. For the Texans, they have certainly done some things right, otherwise they wouldn't be hosting this playoff game, but it just looked so different than what many expected, because of the state of the offense. We just saw the Miko Ryans for the starters out there for a series or two, simply because they needed to see something from the unit. Unfortunately, the offensive line has been an absolute atrocity, and they are one of the least efficient early down attacks, significantly dialing up the level of difficulty for Stroud. Now, Houston's defense has been stellar, with an elite duo of guys off the edges in Will Anderson Jr. and Daniel Hunter, paired with one of the premier young corners in Derek Stingley Jr., and better range at safety. We've just seen Mahomes and Lamar have big days against them recently, however. So if you paid attention to a couple of points that I brought up here, the biggest weakness for the Chargers, being the interior free and pass protection, is somewhat mitigated by the fact that edge duo for Houston rarely slides inside, as Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt to tackle are pretty damn good answers to limit the impact. Danico Autry working over those guys on third downs will actually be a major piece I'll be keeping my eye on, and while I don't love LA's receiving corps outside of McConkey, that guy's been a demon against man coverage, and he just made sure to bump up Quentin Johnston's confidence off a career day, who at least gives you some real upside on run rate routes away from his defender, including what he can provide after the catch. Herbert may not be a big time dual threat guy, but we've seen him rip off explosive runs when you don't account for him, and all the guys in the back end are locked up with receivers. I don't see the Texans offense having a lot of success attacking the edges in the run game with Khalil Mack setting the point, but what could allow them to hang around is the CJ to Nico Collins connection being worked over and over again. Still, if Minter does go a little bit deeper into his bag with third down looks versus the front five that has really struggled to pick stuff up, they could be in for a long day. So I'd go Chargers by a touchdown here. Now let's move on to the divisional round, where we've got the Kansas City Chiefs joining the party and hosting the AFC West rivals in the LA Chargers. For KC, if you ignore a 38-0 beatdown at the hands of the Broncos in Week 18 with the backups out there, their only loss of the season came at the hands of the Bills back in Week 11. For large stretches of the season, most people were saying that they were squeaking by opponents thanks to some favorable bounces of the ball and also flags being thrown. However, they've quietly risen now to the top 10 DVOA on offense, defense, and special teams, and they just played the best football of the season in the last two games we saw from them. Patrick Mahomes is unreal on third downs again, Joe Thuney moving out to left tackle stabilized that unit, Chris Jones is still one of the most productive pass rushers in the league, flexibility to move all across the front, and they do a great job of holding opponents to field goals whilst they get in the end zone themselves. So it's going to be a tough task for the Bolts to fend off the mighty rivals at Arrowhead, but I do believe they have some elements to make this one interesting. Those two teams were tied at 10 points apiece back in Week 4, when Alley was really banged up before the Chiefs got the decisive touchdown with 6 minutes left, and then 10 weeks later it took a field goal doinking off the upright and in by the backup kicker for KC to win. Both sides should be basically at full strength, outside of Chiefs wide receiver Rashee Rice, who was lost in the first meeting, and they look as good as they've done all year. Neither offense was able to consistently run the ball against the other side, and I expect a lot of the weight being put on his quarterbacks, with logic in scoring range, putting together long drives with paper cuts. Chargers DC Jesse Minter should have the green light to throw the kitchen sink at Mahomes, and he'll get him a few times, but that guy's just so good at manipulating rush angles and converting on key downs, while the Chiefs have a distinct advantage with Chris Jones against any of those three guys on the interior for a lay. So even though it will be like 20-40s off and some rust to shake off initially, I'll say a play in the favor through those avenues each will be the difference for KC to move on. And then the Baltimore Ravens at the Buffalo Bills. This is the matchup we've all been waiting for, the two MVP frontrunners going head to head as they try to make it to the first ever Super Bowl each, and I expect those two guys to lay it all on the line when they get on the field. As we look all the way back to week 4 when these two sides first met, it resulted in a 35-10 thrashing of the Bills, with Derrick Henry going for about 200 yards, while Josh Allen had his worst showing outside of a couple of hero ball heaves. I look at that as a learning experience for Buffalo's offensive coordinator Joe Brady, as he allowed a strong Ravens front to dare him out of running the ball, and those guys simply weren't scared of locking everybody up in man coverage. Now, what's different about the Bills this time around is that they've since brought in Amari Cooper, who hasn't put up huge numbers, but you can feel the impact he makes when a team asks that group to win one-on-one. For as good as Baltimore has been over the second half of the season, I don't think they have the individual quality rushing forward to regularly get home against this pass protection unit. And then if you do blitz Josh Allen, he's as good as anybody I've ever seen at getting himself out of the situations and creating something out of structure. Unfortunately, I don't see how Buffalo can really stop this multifaceted Ravens attack on the other side. We already know how much they can struggle against a vertically oriented ground game, but they also can't allow those ends to crash with the threat of Lamar pulling the ball. Plus, then he can deliver some sidearm throws and RPOs if you try to do like scraper exchanges or something, and now let's say Flowers, hopefully healthy at that point, ripping off chunks. I just think it's too much for a defense that consistently punches above their weight, with a safety group whose angles have a tendency of getting burned, and Josh will have to put on the Superman cape in order to keep up on the scoreboard. Ravens move on for me. And that sets up a repeat of last year's AFC Championship game, this time at Arrowhead, between the Baltimore Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs. And this is one I've really gone back and forth on, because to me you have the hottest team in the league right now, against a group on the other side who has done this each of the last 2 years, probably fresh at that point, at home, determined to write NFL history as the first ever team to three-peat. When you look at what Chiefs defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo has done for the most part against Baltimore, he's kind of been Lamar's kryptonite, only scoring more than 20 points once in the past 4 meetings. That does however include the season kickoff at Kansas City, where the Ravens were so likely away from having a chance to win it on a 2-point conversion. You look at the had figured out KC's defense after a slow start, and when you look at those big time matchups they've had, it oftentimes comes down to Baltimore going away from the run game and having a couple of costly turnovers. I don't believe that'll happen with King Henry back there, and the other component of Spag's game plans have been heavy blitz rate, with the lack of answers that we've seen Lamar have against it. As I already mentioned, no other quarterback has been better against the blitz this year, and I believe he's actually more dangerous now when you do give him a lane as a runner. As we flip things around, you have a guy in Mahomes who has delivered in high leverage moments more than anybody in the sport at this stage of his career. He's looked more comfortable back in the pocket recently, and while we may see some well-timed pressures from the second level or the slot again, if Baltimore can't manipulate protections and or have a couple of guys win the matchups up front, it could be a long day for them. Where KC hasn't been as dangerous, and something I called for last week when I said every other quarterback on an AFC playoff team has over 20 such completions, Mahomes is connected with someone 20 plus yards down the field just 14 times all year long. So they'll attack Stevens and probably also rookie Nate Wiggins to get a couple of PI calls on deep shots, but it's not something they constantly have to worry about. Both teams are peaking at the right time, but I'll go with Baltimore here actually. This truly feels like Lamar's time. He's so much more well equipped for dealing with the things Spags has thrown at him in the past. I think Zach Orr will have his chance to make Mahomes hesitate on a few occasions, and ironically it'll be Justin Tucker on a walk-off field goal that sends them to New Orleans. Now let's shift gears here and switch over to the NFC, where its first matchup in the wildcard round is the Green Bay Packers at the Philadelphia Eagles. Another rematch from way earlier, actually the second game of the entire season, the kind of weird Friday night game in Brazil on that field where everybody was slipping, and Packers quarterback Jordan Love got hurt late when they were trying to set up a Hail Mary that could have potentially won them that game. That game was the first indication that this Eagles offense was going to be a lot tougher to prepare for than the oversimplified version we saw last year, now under Kellen Moore. There was a dip in the middle of the season where there seemed to be some more turmoil within the locker room, but since they've started to run the offense through the 2-star receivers and soon to be Offensive Player of the Year Saquon Barkley, they've been incredibly tough to stop. With how well this offensive line has performed once again, if Jalen Hurts looks like himself back from the concussion and adds a few 3rd down scrambles, that only adds to that. Meanwhile, Philly's defense is taking massive strides under the old guru Vic Fangio, with a couple of rookies reinvigorating that secondary, and the linebacker crew that is actually a major plus rather than an area opponents have been able to pick on in the past. That group is number 1 in schedule adjusted DVOA and yards per play allowed. On the opposite side of the field, you have a Packers team who have had quite different feelings about at different points of the year. Head coach Matt LaFleur was able to take an outcast Malik Willis and win games in Void of Love on the center for a couple of weeks, and they actually didn't lose any other game outside of week 1 that didn't go against another NFC North opponent. But you get swept by both the Lions and Vikings with slow starts in every single matchup, and even though it was a coach's decision to pull the quarterback, it wasn't a great look losing the season finale to the Bears. I still very much believe in the offensive play calling, but we'll need more of the high end of the variance in terms of the aggressive downfield throws paired with the run game to take this group on a deep playoff run, and we're not even sure if the guy chucking the ball is healthy. Meanwhile, it doesn't always feel that way when you watch them against big time opponents, but this Green Bay defense did quietly finish 5th in both DVOA and EP per play. Being more disruptive against the run and taking the ball away have been huge in that. I really want to go with the upset here because at full capacity and at the peaks they've shown this season, I believed in the Packers as legit Super Bowl contenders. I simply see a lot more avenues for Philly to pull this one out, however, especially with Christian Watson hurting his knee. This receiving corps for Green Bay will have issues separating from Quinion Mitchell, Cooper DeJean and company, and Love has been good for a couple of turnover-worthy plays a week, which CJ Gardner-Johnson, even with some of his faults, is very capable of coming down with. Plus, while I like what Jeff Hafley has done with this defense in year 1, and we did see a couple of head-scratching moments from Hurts as well in the first matchup, including a pick by Green Bay's ball-hawking safety Xavier McKinney, Philly simply has too many ways they can attack you, with Gio Alexander out as well. I just think they hit on a few big plays for the air early and grind this one away, as the Packers have the arrow pointing down from where they were a few weeks ago still, and the bloodthirsty Philly crowd won't help. We actually get another week 1 rematch, which feels pretty wild, when this time it's Jaden Daniels and the Commanders surprisingly going to Tampa Bay, which the Bucs were pretty much in control when they first met, outside of a couple of big scrambles by the rookie. It looked for a while as if Tampa would miss out on the playoffs altogether, struggling against the Saints team in Week 18 that they had steamrolled in the first meeting. With how vulnerable they've shown to be through the air defensively, that has made a lot of the games pretty entertaining, but it's also not allowed the team as a whole to relax, who are committing to stopping the run, and putting a lot of pressure on the guys in coverage to hold up, despite some injuries they've dealt with. Thankfully, their offense has certainly shown the firepower to come out on top of even shootouts. Their 3rd in success rate on dropbacks and 6th on run plays, with rookie Bucky Irvin having really added some juice to a more varied gap-scheme rushing attack orchestrated by offensive coordinator Liam Cohen, and Baker Mayfield absolutely ripping throws, along with adding a couple of key scrambles. They're the only offense in the entire league to convert more than 50% of 3rd downs on the season. Washington, on the other hand, went on a 7-1 run following the week 1 defeat at the hands of the Bucs, where the offense was up there with any units in the league looking at several of the important metrics. It seemed as if things were slowing down for them when they lost 3 straight, and the fast-paced attack was challenged with more true dropback settings, and not staying head of the sticks as much with a limited menu of plays. However, we've seen Darryl C. Cliff Kingsbury evolve to some degree with moving guys around, and Jaden has been a nightmare to deal with, now that he's also willing to hammer in the middle of the field. The defense has certainly come back down to earth, after it looked like they would use the upswing provided by their own offense as a jumping off board, while playing as much single high coverage without the dudes that can hang with receivers or get to the passer. It's been a struggle to get off the field themselves. Going by what it looked like the first time around these two sides met, it's tough to make a case for the Commanders to flip the outcome in their favor, yet I would certainly argue that some of the key contributors for them have elevated their execution, and if you bring up the level of competition they faced, there's a reason they won a couple more games than Tampa. They just make big plays when they need them most, and that's led by the rookie quarterback. If Todd Bowles decides to heat that guy up, I can see Daniels hit Terry McLaurin in stride and make him miss for a long scramble a couple of times each. They should actually drop 8 and force him to work deeper into his progressions with guys that have eyes on him. Where I just couldn't go with Washington advancing here is the prospects of them creating stops. Baker and company have been too good at extending drives. Mike Evans will have a few big catches against his good old friend Marshall Lattimore, expected back for this matchup, and maybe it's Bucky isolated with an older Bobby Wagner in space on a couple of occasions that end up making a difference. give me Tampa driving late and putting this one away once more. In the final matchup of the wildcard round, the Minnesota Vikings at the LA Rams, we have the Vikings sighing over the idea of traveling to the only team that actually beat them this year, not named Detroit, and they'll be the ones a little bruised coming off a disappointing Sunday night game that could have secured them having this weekend off, while the Rams set the majority of the starters on Sunday. Just thinking back to the Thursday night affair from week 8, it was the refs missing a blatant face mask call on a safety that prematurely ended the contest, as the Vikes would have otherwise had a chance to drive for a game-tying touchdown with just under 2 minutes left. Again, it's a tough look for Minnesota having to go on the road here as a 14-win squad, while the Rams intentionally made the choice that having their guys healthy was more important than battling for the number 3 seed. They must be sick to their stomach for all the opportunities they missed to keep the score close, and I'd expect the coaching staff to really get in the lab for this one. Kevin O'Connell has been tremendous at guiding Sam Darnold to a resurrective campaign in which they were one of the most explosive attacks in the game and could really challenge opponents with the depth of skill position weaponry if you throw extra resources at slowing down Justin Jefferson as the ace. The defense under Brian Florence, meanwhile, has been equally strong at creating what you'd call explosives on their end, with sacks in terms of unblocked pressures and takeaways, finishing 4th and 1st in those areas respectively. With the constant new ideas and how well orchestrated all 11 guys have been, this is an ever-evolving operation. Those guys will face off against what has been one of the best play-calling head coaches and quarterback pairings we have seen over the better part of the last 4 years between Sean McVay and Matt Stafford. While they may not quite have the same big play ability as Minnesota, they finished the regular season top 10 in both schedule-adjusted DVOA and success rate, and that's with constant reshuffling on the O-line and injuries to the top 2 receivers at times. Which now they should have the week 1 starting 5 up front for the first time since then, and Puka Nacua having established himself as one of the most complete receivers in the game. Defensively, the Rams have more wards with questionable linebacker and corner groups, but the young front has definitely been ahead of schedule. Between Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, coming over from Florida State as the top 2 selections this past April, combined with last year's duo of Kobe Turner and Byron Young, they're about as tough to deal with in obvious passing situations as any foursome in the league. Rewatching that Week 8 battle, what stood out to me was this: while the Rams never really popped any runs, they did carry the ball 32 times for 107 yards against the Vikings front that has been incredibly tough to run on. You may think that's just an inefficient way of operating, but that is including -3 yards combined on the final real possession when they know the run was coming, and then 3 kneel downs at the end. And what the commitment to the ground game did was keep Minnesota honest and simple in terms of the looks they presented. That set the table for Stafford chucking off play action, and I believe with a healthy interior 3 of the O-line, that'll only be more challenging. Now, where I think we see a difference in the Vikes offense is their ability to get into heavy personnel and create problems for a smaller LA front, tiring out those bodies and giving Sam time to set up Justin Jefferson or Jordan Addison on a post or deep over route, or even having a linebacker chase TJ Hawkinson across the field could be a real problem. Once again, I feel kind of bad for Minnesota being in the circumstances after what a season they've had, and I could absolutely see the Rams pull this off again, but I'll say KOC and Flores have a couple more tricks up their sleeves, and we see Justin Jefferson have a legacy performance to stay alive here. Now let's transition to a divisional round, where it's once again the Minnesota Vikings traveling to Detroit to take on the Lions, and we get part number 3 of this NFC North clash. And there's not a ton for me to add, since we just had this showdown on Sunday night, and like every previous show I watched, took like half an hour to get into depth on it. Coming into the matchup, I thought the Vikings would be able to force Detroit into a lot of base personnel defensively, where they've been really vulnerable, but the return of Alex Anzalone made a massive difference and seemed to reinvigorate a Lions D that came in limping already, with a full lineup of guys on injured reserve alone. Meanwhile, I expected Minnesota to neutralize their opponent's run game to a large degree, and make Jared Goff's head spin on a few key downs with complex pressure looks. And while I wouldn't say either one of those predictions, if you will, came true, I think the final result doesn't really paint the full picture. By the numbers, Detroit actually only had one run that was deemed successful in the first half, before Jahmyr Gibbs ripped off some chunk gains following the break when the defense had really gone tired. Meanwhile, the Vikings made it to the opposing 13-yard line or closer on 4 different occasions, but only came away with 6 total points on those possessions. Still, to see an effort like this from an incredibly banged up Detroit defense was highly encouraging, with the mastery of Ben Johnson on the other side, with how explosive Gibbs is, how in tune Goff has looked like for the majority of the season, and the element Jameson Williams has added as a more reliable run of the catch and deep threat. Plus they own the second best special teams unit based on DVOA, while the Vikings rank in the bottom 10. I just believe Minnesota kinda runs out of gas in the spot, had the bye all the way back in week 6, laid it all on the line in the season finale, only to lose by 3 touchdowns due to getting out-executed in those pivotal moments, coming off a tough fight with the Rams in this scenario, where Conley is just able to defeat his former boss in McVay, while the Lions get much needed time off, and we already heard Dan Campbell tell the Vikings head coach that they'll meet again 2 weeks later, so they're probably already starting some early prep, along with looking into some of the pressure looks they threw at Minnesota last week, with the highest cover 0 rate of the entire season. This setup simply favors them too much, even if I personally picked against them just a few days ago. Meanwhile, you've got a rematch from week 4 between the Tampa Bay Bucks and the Philadelphia Eagles, which kinda served as a wake-up call for the Birds prior to the bye week, and even though they still had to add on some kinks on offense in particular, that set the table for a 10-game winning streak. Going back to the matchup, the Bucks really jumped on them early on, with Baker pushing the ball past the sticks and throwing touchdowns on the first 2 drives, while forcing a 3-and-out by the Eagles between those possessions, and really being in control from that point onwards against a Philly squad not necessarily equipped, or at the very least used to playing from behind. Obviously Tampa Bay is one of the premier run-stopping units in the league, and if you take out a 59-yard burst by Saquon, they held their opponents to just 2.8 yards per carry on the day. Making sure this game is put in the hands of the quarterbacks is a strategy they'll once again try to deploy. There may be some variants with their own guy, but if they allow Philly to stay balanced, and now you end up with AJ and Devontae in isolated matchups off that, that's just not a formula for success. Both of these quarterbacks have really struggled at not allowing pressures to turn to sacks, but they also get to operate behind 2 of the top 10 offensive lines in the sport, with the Eagles vying for the number 1 spot. And that's kinda also connected to who I trust more in terms of defensive minds, game planning for their opponents. Philly's Vic Fangio has a better understanding for the totality of the game, and he is the more talented as well as disciplined secondary, with only one big-time receiver in Mike Evans to worry about. I see this being a tight affair, but a big catch and run by one of the Philly wideouts puts them up, and then Saquon takes from the house, where the box is packed but he squeezes through a lane to send the Birds to another NFC Championship game. Where they travel to Detroit for one of the few head-to-heads we actually haven't gotten a preview of during the regular season, the top 2 overall teams in terms of point differential, and to me the matchup to watch has to be Detroit's number 1 ranked scoring offense against Philly's number 2 scoring D. You've got Jalen Carter and company going up against the rugged Lions O-line that has enforced their will on pretty much anybody they've gone up against, the speed of Jahmyr Gibbs, testing the angles of one of the most disciplined back sevens, but more than anything, how deep Ben Johnson's willing to go into his bag against Vic Fangio, who does as good a job as anybody at limiting your staples offensively. While I'd slightly favor Detroit in that regard, that's a pretty fair fight. Now, what we get on the flip side with Kellen Moore versus Aaron Glenn, as the 2 other coordinators involved here, could make the difference. I love the willingness by the latter one of those to lean into certain schematic schematic differences. Now, what we get on the flip side with Kellen Moore versus Aaron Glenn, as the 2 other offensive Now what we get on the flip side of Kellen Moore versus Aaron Glenn, as the 2 other coordinators involved here, could make the difference. I love the willingness by the latter one of those to lean into certain schematic tendencies based on their opponents, and how well he's done at masking some of the personnel deficiencies the Lions have had to deal with throughout the year, while Moore has shown a propensity for not coming up with answers off script. Yet I think that lack of bodies ultimately comes back to haunt the top seed in the spot. Detroit has been one of the best run defenses in the league, even with a more recent injury to Lee McNeil, but Philly has the ability to spread those guys out offensively, and even though they've been comfortable operating out of nickel in that regard, it's a different beast having Saquon going up against a 6-man box when you also have to account for the quarterback. They'll probably view big ones and mitigate their opponent's ability to come through in high-leverage moments, as they've done all season long, while Fangio gives Goff trouble in defined dropback settings, as he has done on multiple occasions when those 2 sides have faced off before. And so we get a battle of the Birds in Super Bowl 59, the Baltimore Ravens, the Philadelphia Eagles, which of course one final time is a matchup we already saw during the regular season, more precisely a 24-19 win for Philly at Baltimore, which actually looks better for the then home team thanks to a meaningless touchdown with just 3 seconds left. I really went into this exercise with no predestined outcome in mind, just going through all the individual matchups to get us to this point, but I did look at the Ravens continuing to ascend as a force in the AFC, and the Eagles being the healthiest, most talented group in the NFC, so landing here made sense. Determining who will win this time around wasn't as easy. Going through the game log of the initial meeting and watching back a few key plays, I thought the Ravens had a chance to put their opponents away actually, when they were up 9-0, but decided to punt on a 4th and 2 in plus territory, before Justin Tucker missed a couple of long field goal tries when he had already shanked the PAT, Saquon was balled up for most of the day until he popped a couple of runs that put Philly up by 9, and he added a field goal on the next possession when the Ravens front was kind of worn down. Sparing them out and making Hurts a running threat was more so the killer, along with yak opportunities of RPOs. Meanwhile, the Eagles defense clamped down after the first quarter, negating deep shots, and then when Lamar checked the ball down, they were ready to rally for quick stops, highlighted by rookie Cooper DeJean flipping Derrick Henry onto his behind late. When I think about how Baltimore may attack their opponents this time around, I believe condensing formations and then expanding out of them on early down play action could yield better results than allowing Philly to read route stems and match patterns. Plus, I'm always need to be more conscious about working up into the pocket against an aggressive D-line. And funnily enough, it was after the first meeting that he mentioned in his post-game interview how his mom cussed him out about not taking some of the lanes given to him as a runner. There were some opportunities to hit secondary throwing windows after extending plays, but the most dangerous rushing threat at the position, taking off when all the eligibles have declared against match coverages, could make some huge differences. Meanwhile, I thought Baltimore's plan defensively made sense, but could use a few extra wrinkles. I'll put Marlon Humphrey or A.J. Brown a bunch and press him in order to deny easy pitch and catch RPOs. They'll hit a few shots outside the numbers most likely, but those weren't the issue the first time around. What I really liked was seeing them load up the front and then bail out of heavy pressure looks to spook Hurts and make him uncomfortable back there. He may have some nice runs again, but if you get him to put his eyes down and bail on the concept altogether because the first read isn't open or he's just not sure what he's seeing, that's a win. So disrupting that with different bodies dropping out and getting a free rush on a couple of occasions, since you don't have the guys off the edges who can regularly get home, this should be a battle until the end, and to me we'll have reached a point where we look at Philly being the most talented team in the tournament, but the Ravens have the best player. Lamar has been unbelievable this year, and facing this defense for a second time, I believe he'll have the answers yet again. They had a couple of big time drops, and Lamar completely inexplicably missed a layup throw on a third down at some point. Those won't be there, and Kyle Hamilton now playing deep primarily. He gets his hands on the pass late, the Jalen just forces up to AJ. Ravens win an absolute banger, and John Harbaugh secures his second Lombardi trophy in the stadium where the lights went out 12 years ago on him. One of the 2 seasons I actually saw the team live, and he ended up winning it all. Whether that's the eventual matchup or we get any other pairing, I will have an extensive Super Bowl preview coming out a week prior, because that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this preview of the postseason. If you did, please hit the like button for me and subscribe for more if you haven't done so yet. Who do you believe will go the distance? Any dark horses you making a run? Let me know in the comments. I'll have an article on my all-rookie team coming out next week, or on my site hellosforfootballtalk.com, where you can find all of my content. In the meantime, you can watch any of my other videos on here, read some New Year's resolutions I released prior to week 18 already, for all the playoff qualifiers at that point, and follow me on social media for my thoughts on all kinds of stuff happening around the sport. Have a great start to the new year, and I'll be looking forward to hearing from you guys. So until then, see you later. Peace!